you so much for coming out on this lovely evening. I want to thank my host, Population Matters, my great host, Dorothy Ux. I mean, I'm telling you, we have, I'm coming back 10 pounds heavier, I'm sure, because of the great food that you have here in England, and love your biscuits. It's amazing. I want you to start out by thinking of a sardine. How many of you are familiar with sardines? Right? I don't mean eating them on a sandwich or a biscuit, as you would say. I want you to think about sardines by the way they behave in nature. They're very small, but they never act alone. If you can, look up on Public Broadcasting Network, on Nature, on your computer, and look up this wonderful documentary about how animals work together. Beekeepers know that about bees, how they would never survive if they worked on their own. And sardines are pretty amazing because they are in millions and millions of them, act as one fish. And if the whales come and the dolphins come to eat them, they act as a fish. And as soon as they come, they divide and they go together. And they divide and they go together. And they don't always win, but they win enough to keep surviving. And I think we have to start thinking like sardines. We have to quit thinking that we're this lone little fish in the world with big whales and dolphins out to get us, and we'll never survive and it's hopeless. I think we have to act like the real sardines and come together and fight those big monsters together. And so that's what I want you to do tonight is act like a sardine. So I'm going to start with my talk, this book. I don't know if you can see, there's a woman's face coming down into the river. I had nothing to do with the cover. I was very pleased with it. I'm very fortunate that a publisher by the name of Free Thought House Press, they publish many agnostic, atheist, humanist type literature in my home state in Farmington, Minnesota. They're a big shout out to them. I'm not a very traditional person. No one has ever really called me that, and one day I was at a book fair and I just went up to their table and I read it and I said, "You need to publish this manuscript that I have," and he just said, "Bring it by." 1 year to the day later it was published, and that's very fast for a book. So I'm very, very fortunate. I look at the book and wonder how I ever convinced anybody to publish something on this topic. I still don't know how that happened, but I sometimes just don't ask any questions. So I wanted to start out, says, what if I told you that you could help the world with one brave act? One act, not many acts. Okay? Which would help wildlife truly thrive. How many of you would like to see wildlife doing better on the planet? This will do it. This will really do it. And reduce poverty. Again, we want that to happen, right? It would successfully reduce emissions of CO2, create real job opportunities. And this act would also help create the real possibility of world peace. Now, saying that in a Quaker house seems very appropriate. I've been a peace activist, and obviously it's not working too well, but still am. We try our best. What if I told you this brave act did not require any new inventions and is the most comprehensive and efficient thing you can do? What if I told you it was the most compassionate act you could possibly sign up for? It only required that we start telling the truth. No, this is not an infomercial. I sound like those free TV offers. It'll do everything. It'll clean your toilet. No, I'm not selling you an infomercial. What I am trying to sell is an idea. I wrote this book to make us more successful in creating a better world. And the only way I believe we can do that is to wrap our heads around and our hearts around the whole issue of overpopulation. I want to change the world, and I'm tired of not being successful. I'm tired of seeing oil-drenched birds. I see how hard everyone is working. They're trying to help the homeless by giving them food and shelter. They're trying to, but nothing seems to really get better long term. We're like hamsters in a wheel, little mice, we're working hard but not getting very far. We have saved the eagles in our country. DDT, a huge problem, making sure that the eagles did not produce calcium so their eggs would break. And as soon as we stopped making DDT, of course we still sell it to other countries, but our eagles, I now have eagles regularly in my nature center. That never happened before. It's a great success story, and it's really not to be dismissed as something we can be proud of. But we're really losing other things. We're losing the polar bears. They say that because of so much ice melting due to climate change, they just can't swim far enough to get to their food, and there's not enough ice to walk on. It's just so sad. We ended the Vietnam War, but now we have all the wars in the Middle East. We've made progress and gains in organic food. I've been a part of the organic movement in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota for a long, long time. I belong to community-supported agriculture, is what we call it in the States. Part of the permaculture movement. I know that's very big here in England. But in the States and elsewhere, due to overpopulation, we're just losing farmland by the acre. We're banning plastic bags. I know that I just heard of another state that just said we're going to ban plastic bags. That's great. I think that's wonderful. But the oceans are still rising with growing amounts of plastic. So you just feel like a little bit of progress, but the whole picture isn't really. We strive for justice, but they just keep changing the rules. I finally figured out what was behind this. What is the thing that we don't talk about as a culture? It is not in the public lexicon, as it were. I have to give credit to those working on climate change for getting at least that word into the public dialogue. So when a newspaper brings it up, people know what you're talking about. I give a lot of credit to groups like 350.org who have made that something everyone, it's on the tip of their tongue and they know it. I wish we could do as well with overpopulation. It would help if those people who already know about it would talk about it, but they seem to go a little downstream. I'll tell you what I mean by downstream in a minute, but they go a little bit downstream and they stay on their issue. And they've been very successful at telling people about climate change. But this graph is incredibly important because what it shows is that globally, now we know that industrialized nations consume a lot more. That's clear that we consume a lot more, and for sure in the United States, we are the giant gluttons of the world, admittedly. But when you have numbers that are reaching so high, you end up with the kind of overpopulation. What I mean by overpopulation, I must define, is any resource that cannot be sustained long-term under its demand. So that resource could be just water in a well. It doesn't mean that you're driving a big, huge limousine to work. It doesn't mean that you've never seen a bicycle in your life, that you eat high on the food chain. Those are all things that are gluttonous, for sure. But overpopulation is really about there's no longer any fill in the blank so that you could continue living. No longer any clean air or any arable soil or any of the above. It's not just look at the resources those Americans suck out of the world. We are. I mean, I think we're 25% of the world's population or less, and we consume well over half the resources. It's really shameful. But when we grow by 83 million people a year, in a world that's running out of everything, we cannot address those issues by just legislating and begging and pleading people to please consume less. We should keep doing that. It's only the moral thing to do, but it's not enough. And that's what I'm here to say, is that it's not enough to talk about getting rid of cars and bicycling. I'm very impressed with the people who dare bicycle on these roads. Oh my goodness. We have something called bike lanes. You might want to check that out. Oh, very brave people bicycle. And I hope all the carbon you're saving doesn't land you in a hot so that we can...
We have the same problem with deer here.
Pardon me?
We have the same problem. They're only killed by roadkill now, and people are grateful when they do get hit by cars, because they're destroying, with the tree, when you cut down coppicing of the hazel, they eat everything, and they've done an enormous amount of damage to lots and lots of plants.
Deer love our habits, which is to fragment forest. We fragment forest and they go, thank you very much. We have more deer in Minnesota than we did before colonization, which means we have 1.5 million deer in my state, 15,000 roadkill hits. Anybody hit a deer before? It's not fun. Done it.
Yeah.
Not fun. Not fun. Very expensive as well. Very, very tragic for all involved. And so we have a problem in that we cannot see ourselves as just another version of deer. My predecessors decided that Canadian geese should be in Minnesota. They brought them in, clipped their primary feathers, and imprinted them on my nature center. I have the pictures. There were pens of them. What were they thinking? And that was the, if you remember the Sully, the guy who saved the plane that landed in the Hudson River, those were geese flying into the engines and cut his, so my geese are the ones that fly into the airplanes at the airport. We're the suburb right next to the Minneapolis St. Paul airport. And so they spent the 70s bringing the geese in, and they spent the 80s and 90s taking them out. Only they haven't been able to be very successful doing that. The only one who's saving us are the coyotes, because at one time I had 77 goose nests in my nature center, and oh my goodness, that was the terrible thing. So understanding the fundamentals of the physics of ecology is so important, and that we are not exempt from them. We just have to play by the rules. And we've been able to, through our intelligence, to kind of bypass those rules for a while. So I put on my hiking boots and I moved upstream. And what I mean by that is I went to where the source of the problem is, rather than downstream when it's like if I had started with the 3 deer, we would have handled the problem. But we have to wait until it's such a crisis, then we can get people to notice. So from this vantage point, I can see that it can all be boiled down to Paul McCartney tickets. What? What is she talking about? Well, they're in high demand. Paul McCartney came to a place in Minnesota called the Target Center, and that it seats almost 20,000 people. But there are 3.5 million people in the Twin Cities. That must sound very little to you, those of you who are from the London area. But assuming that a quarter of those are fans, the demand exceeds the supply of tickets, driving up the cost and making sure only some get in. I think the tickets went from anywhere from $200 to $500 to see Paul McCartney. And wow, that's overpopulation. That's what it is. It's something that is in high demand and there isn't enough of. Another way to understand the overpopulation is by our former Justice Anton Scalia. May he rest in peace. And he had 9 children. So what if each of those 9 children all had 9 children for 11 generations, starting at the age of 35? How many great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren would he have? Any guesses?
Thousands. Billion?
The answer is 31 billion. Wow. 31 billion. Now that's scary on a lot of levels if you knew his politics. Woo, woo. 31 billion people just by having the same amount of children every generation, not even going up. I had 9 children. Well, I want to have 9 children. I want to have, because we tend to want to duplicate what our family size was, because it's what we're used to. Now, some people are smart enough going, that was a lot of diapers. I don't want to do that. But other than that. So we all live on an ecological playing field. We ignore it, we deny it. In our Congress, there are people who deny evolution, let alone climate change. So there's a lot of denial out there. Must be comforting. But this third planet from the sun, if you study astronomy at all, it's a rare, rare place. I get very emotional when I talk about her. In fact, I wanted to get a shirt that just had a big Earth on it that said, I'm with her. Have you seen that one? Isn't that great? I'm with her. I'm with the Earth. And she's telling us she can't handle what we're doing to the planet anymore. She's got a fever, and we just keep ignoring it collectively. But most of us think and act downstream. So while we're busy sort of anesthetizing ourselves with all of these video games and TV, we basically pay little attention to our ecological playing field while we pollute. And until it's in our very own home, we tend to go, not my problem, not my problem. Nature's the ultimate ruler. She's the one who will tell us when the time is up and she can no longer support who we are. The thing I know about being a naturalist is, as smart as the dolphins are and brilliant as the whales are, I'm not so sure they can see into the future like our species can. We just need to use that ecological advantage to our advantage. She can be harsh, especially when we don't play by her rules. There are people, as you know, starving all over the world in horrible famines. They're not a thing of the past. They are ever present, and they horrify us. But there are reasons for them, and many have to do with what first world countries or developing countries are doing to the world. Climate change is affecting the people who had nothing to do with it. I read once that it really pretty horrifying that the First Nation peoples, I met a woman who was from the Sami Nation at the Green Economics Conference, and we were talking a little bit, and I said, in North America, I learned that because of the way the trade winds work and the climate, everything works, the pollutants, the persistent organic pollutants that cause cancer, deposit in the very northern regions of our world more than they do where they're actually produced. And that means they end up on the lichen that grows on the tundra, which is eaten by the caribou, which means the people who had nothing to do with produce it are getting cancers like we are. And so the world is one place. It's not, well, we don't produce the pollution, so we won't suffer from it. No, we produce the pollution, and everybody, maybe disproportionately, hit places where they don't even have the resources to fight it. So what are the rules? There's my beloved deer. Live within your limits. And the limits aren't set by your bank accounts. They're set by your ecological accounts. Our ecological accounts are being overdrawn by August of every year. We go, and World Overshoot Day is now in August, and it keeps creeping up. Maybe this year it'll be July. That means any of the biomass that we produce during the year is used up, and then we go into our wells, and then we go into the things that have been saved for hundreds of years. And that is why we are hurting so much, is because we're not living within our limits. This is the organization that I'm on the advisory board for, World Population Balance, and they're really trying to show that we need to do this in order to achieve all of the successes we want to achieve. So overpopulation is about the dynamic between supply and demand. That's where it lies. Humans can stretch those limits, but not without consequence. When we had the Green Revolution, when we started developing synthetic fertilizers, we extended that boundary, but not without consequence. We also greatly extended our human populations. By being able to feed more people, you get more people. That's just the way it goes. And there are many people who wanted to feed those deer and did. I had to go by the fences and take bags of corn and capture them because people, oh, they're so cute, we have to feed them. Never mind. Anyway, so how did we get here? Well, we got here in a number of ways. The Green Revolution, we had in post-World War II, we had a huge baby boom. We had the hope that there would be great peace after World War II, the war to end all wars. We would like that to have been the war to end all wars. We've had tremendous successes in our medicine. We're saving we're curing a lot of diseases, and without looking at what the consequences of that is. And the consequence is we're successful, but at what price? With deliberate action and inaction, our religions have given us the narrative that this fits into very nicely. And that narrative puts us in the center of creation. No matter what one of those you want to look at, it really is about, and then humans were created after all those incidental other species. And if you're a naturalist, you know that they're not incidental. I teach that one thing I have to say I love about your country is that you don't have to have screens on your windows, which means you don't have mosquitoes issues. Oh my goodness! Well, like I said, I manage basically a swamp, and I don't go outside without coating myself with all kinds of things. And I teach that the mosquito pollinates 60% of all blueberries, so you can't hate them unless you hate blueberries. And blueberry pie, and blueberry ice cream, and all the things you can make blueberries with. But these narratives put us in the center. The monotheistic world puts us in the center of creation, and therefore, every time you promote humans, you are doing the work of divine help. The divine, whatever you call the divinity, God, whatever you call that divine inspiration, you are doing the right thing because you're promoting humans. And that really fits in very nicely. And what was interesting, and I have a chapter, the hardest chapter to write was the one on religion. Don't forget I got my doctorate at a Catholic university, where religion was never on the table, even though we were a critical thinking cohort. And religion's never on the table because somehow it's a hands-off topic. It's that's what you believe, it's okay. And I'm here to say it was okay. It's no longer okay. Because when those religions came about, we had so few people on the planet that it was okay. I mean, it's okay to say be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. It's okay to say subdue the earth. It's really okay because there was no way you could subdue the earth at, several 100 million people. But I think of it this way. At the time of Jesus of Nazareth, there were less than, on the planet we figure, the people who are currently living in the United States. So we have 324 million people now in the year 2017, and there were about 300 million people on the planet at the time that these books were written. That's a very different story to tell. I don't think any of those wise people, and there are many wise people that wrote, there's a lot of wisdom to glean out of these books. I don't mean to diminish them at all. But that's not where you go to look for, what do we do about overpopulation? Well, in Isaiah chapter 2, no, it's not in there. And it's not in there because it wasn't remotely on their radar screen. And yet, these are the narratives which still define our world. It doesn't mean we can't still figure out how to find things that are of value, how to treat one another, although that doesn't seem to be working very well. But that is where we go to for wisdom, and it doesn't, if you have to just look at a timetable and say, but that's not where the wisdom lies right now. It is something that made a tremendous amount of sense because there were plagues that could have wiped us out at any time. There weren't that many of us. Now there's 7.5 billion of us, and we grow by 1 million people every 4.5 days, and that's net gain, births minus deaths. Think about that. 1 million more people to feed and clothe and house and take up wildlife with. And yet, the books have never changed their narrative. Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. We say we respect Mother Earth. We say plant trees, pick up litter, buy organic food, but I guarantee you won't say agree to have less than a replacement amount of children anywhere on those downstream lists. I had the very good fortune to be at many of your wetlands places, but very hard to see any messages that say why the otters are hurting around the planet, why the smews and other animals are hurting. It at best might say due to habitat destruction or over-exploitation. Somehow this is being done by some, alien species, transformer, Lego monster. It's not us, but somewhere they're being exploited. So we really haven't had the courage collectively to tell it like it is, to tell the full truth about why these animals are endangered. And these are people who desperately care about them. And secretly, I bet they would agree with us. But when are we going to have the guts and the courage to talk about what we're doing to wildlife based on our numbers? It's really time to wake up and smell the coffee of our human predicament. Between mid-2013 and 2014, your population in Great Britain rose by 491,100 people, compared to an increase of just below 150,000 from 1996 to 1997. So look what's happening right here in Great Britain. You probably feel it. You may know it up here, but I bet it's growing so fast that you feel it. You feel it in your traffic. You feel it just in the crowdedness. You feel it in the rise of prices. You feel it in everything that you feel, and in your politics. I don't believe we're meant to live in these kind of crowded, overpopulation conditions, and I could probably theorize it makes people crazy as well. This should sound alarm bells, and not those of saying, well, I guess we have to be more efficient. I only used 2 sheets of toilet paper today. It's not going to do it. We cannot afford to waste any more time to tell people that overpopulation is solvable. It has to be, or all other efforts will not be enough. That is worth repeating. Overpopulation is solvable and has to be, or all other efforts will not be enough. It's so important to know that. I don't want you to stop recycling. I don't want you to stop driving your electric cars. I don't want you to stop buying organic food and doing everything you can. But it won't be enough unless we address human overpopulation from a compassionate perspective. Because what we're trying to do is make the world a better place. We are trying to improve the common good by addressing this issue. We are not the evildoers that say, well, you've had your children, you just don't want me to have my children. No, we want your children to have a future. And they will not if we continue to think that we do not have to obey nature's laws. When will enough be enough? With apologies to the comedian Jeff Foxworthy, who says, you might be a redneck if, and he's kind of a redneck. We call that someone who's pretty much to the right. He says things like, you might be a redneck if you've been married 3 times and have the same mother-in-law, things like that. I think he's kind of funny. Oh, you want more? Oh, okay. You might be a redneck if you were bought wheels, somebody bought you wheels for your trailer for your wedding present, things like that. So you might be up to your eyeballs in overpopulation if your country is experiencing shortage of food, your state is one traffic jam on Friday afternoons. You might be up to your eyeballs in overpopulation if your country's poverty rate is growing, your farmland is decreasing, your fisheries are emptying, your rainforests are diminishing, your deserts are growing, your carbon emissions are increasing as a whole in spite of individual actions. One of the very good examples of that is In the state of Oregon, you might have heard of Portland's had some real tragedies lately, just like your poor city of London has, and Manchester, all these terrible tragedies. But one of the tragedies that doesn't get a lot of press is that Portland, Oregon has a very, very strong effort to become green. So strong that they have reduced their per capita carbon emissions a great deal. But overall, their carbon emissions have grown because they've become such a popular place to move to. The most popular place to move to is now Colorado and Oregon, and those places are just screaming in overpopulation, so their overall carbon emissions have increased. So in other words, it cannot be solved at that individual level. But I do love the show Portlandia if you ever like to watch that. And it's more expensive to live in the city because what happens is that that's where the jobs become there. And look what's going on in London. It's a very expensive city to live in, hugely overpopulated. And so these are some of the signals that should tell us we live in an overpopulated place. So to try to solve these problems downstream is a lot like treating a smoker's cough with cough syrup. Oh, have some cough syrup. The cough will diminish, but it will not go away. Or finding buckets to catch the water from a leaky roof. It will prevent a problem, but will not solve the leaky roof. At some point, we have to stop smoking and we have to fix the roof. Or do you say roof? Excuse me, roof.
I love it.
Oh, wasn't that a lovely mistake? Okay, I'm learning. I've only been here a week, I'm learning. We are swimming in solutions. Please don't waste your time worrying about solutions. Put your time and effort on getting people to understand the problem. Because we are very good at trying to solve problems once we fully get the problem. We have done tremendous things at my nature center. Once again, to use myself as an example, I've been there for 26 years now. I've been fooling them for that long that I know what I'm doing. Wink, wink, right? Sure, I know how to do that. What am I doing here? I don't know. But we started out by not being able to do anything with smoking. And I would find cigarette butts all over the trails. At one day, one of my student groups found 350 cigarette butts. What we did was we made a paper mache earth and we glued all the cigarette butts to them. Oh, did that stink? And we did an art project, and the slogan read, let's see if I can remember this: "Every littered butt hurts. The earth is not your ashtray." Isn't that good? I thought that was good. And I made a couple of phone calls, and I got a billboard company to give us free billboard space. And we put it on 2 billboards, one in Minneapolis and our twin city of St. Paul. And I remember the day we felt so proud. We bought a picnic lunch, and we had a picnic under our billboard because we told the earth, the world, that you can't just, not only is that polluting you, but then you throw out that horrible cigarette butt, and it's polluting. Well, after I think it took 40 to 45 years to get the story out of how it was damaging our lungs, of how it was, and now they pesticide spray the tobacco so badly. It's just a horrible thing. And now, just about 3 years ago, we banned all smoking at the Nature Center. You know how much blowback I got? None. Zero. I had one friend say, I can't smoke in your park, so I don't go anymore. I said, well, okay, that's all right. We can live without your bad habit. And now we don't even allow it in our parking lot, so I've got to have new signs, and those new signs are going to tell people to please, not smoke. You can smoke in your car, but you can't smoke in the parking lot even. And when I come up to people and tell them to please stop smoking, they profusely apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. It's like, wow, how did we get there? We kept telling the full truth about smoking kills, smoking kills, smoking kills, smoking kills, and finally, in our thick heads, we got it, at least in this neck of the woods, so to speak. So don't worry about solutions. Worry about telling the story. Every time you have the microphone, not just once. I thank you for having me here, but once is not enough because this issue is so hard to get your head and heart wrapped around. The problem is getting to them, changing our story so that our political, social, and cultural decisions are played out on an ecological playing field. And we can't call ourselves green unless we talk about it. We just had an election in our country. I don't want to talk about it because this is on film and I'd like to be let back into the country. But we did have a Green Party who ran against the other major parties and never talked about overpopulation. Are they really green? I don't think so. How can you be green if you don't talk about this side of the story? So how do you ratchet down human numbers? Well, there's two ways, just two ways: death side, birth side. You can kill more people, or you can have less people born. Those are the only two ways that I know of. Maybe you have a third. So on the death side, we'd have to kill off over 83 million people a year. And not only does that grossly inhumane, it doesn't even work. Because let's do the numbers for a second. If you're 5.5 billion people already overpopulated, meaning that we can sustain on our planet, then killing off just the growth isn't going to solve any problems. It's just going to mean hell on earth. That means having a tsunami like hit Sri Lanka in 2004 every single day. That's what would do it, to just get rid of growth. Or if you've got family planning to every woman who wants it right now, we could get rid of the growth. Which would you prefer? I prefer the birth side. Encourage family sizes that are below replacement, teach that two-child families keep us growing. That's a hard lesson to learn because the math is that a two-child family, which was promoted heavily in the 1970s, will, now that we kick this can down the road really far, continue us toward 9 billion. And the reason that is because of who's already here on Earth and who's already at the reproductive age, the median age. And then one-child families do start that trend downward. But again, we do have two choices, the death side and the birth side. I don't think any of these choices are particularly comfortable, but I don't think this is an option. It's being done already in other places. And here's how it's being done. It's being done by governments saying, universally, our country will be better off if we have a population of less people. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to put birth control clinics in every village. We're going to teach people how to use them safely. And we are going to reduce our population so that we can have a better world. What country did that? Anyone want to guess?
Southern India.
Iran did that, but Thailand and Bangladesh as well. There are examples where countries are getting it. They're just going, in Iran, which I'm particularly talking about, and there are others, they had really told, they'd used the Quran to say you need to have more children, and they knew they were going to need to fight a war, and so they needed more soldiers. How fun is that? But once the war was over and they had this burgeoning population which they knew they couldn't feed, they went, we've got to change our story. And they changed the story. They said, nope, the Quran says to have a smaller family and here's your birth control. It worked within 3 years. The other way is grassroots efforts. One of my favorite things, if you look up what Thailand has done, and some of you probably know the story, they now have fashion shows where the dresses are made entirely out of condoms. They're beautiful. They're gorgeous. I need to get one of those slides because these women are walking around and they're in condom dresses. But what does that do? It destigmatizes the condom. It says, isn't this a beautiful thing? This device is giving us not only our economy back, it's saving AIDS, it's saving women from the burden of having children they do not want or can't afford, and it's a beautiful thing. So in Thailand, it was imagine a Buddhist country which is very, very shy, getting so familiar with the condom, and it was done by a man who I always butcher his name, Michai Vervalda, who he was a restaurateur, still is, in Bangkok, and he made his waiters wear condoms on their heads. He did. And he went into, now I want you to imagine this here in England, your proper England. He actually went to third grade classrooms, had students fill up the condoms with water, tie them with a rubber band, and drop them off the buildings. And made them like handle the condoms so they would not feel they were these terrible objects. It really did work. Probably worked because it's a smaller country, but he was a very, very successful at doing this because he knew what the story was. So I hope you'll join me upstream. I hope you'll buy my book and spread it around. And I only say that I have a job. I don't need you to buy my book so that I can feed myself that horrible American food that we have. And it's not as good as your English food here. No, I want you to buy it and spread it around, because what I try to do is articulate this so that you didn't have to, because it's a very difficult and challenging topic to articulate and spread. But also, my ask is that you remember that we cannot achieve our progressive goals without solving overpopulation, and that you challenge those groups you belong to already who don't have a message about this to get one. Thank you for coming tonight. I may be reached at ecoyenta@aol.com. Please write me. Please communicate. Please challenge me. And my last thing I want to do is read you a poem that I wrote. So this poem, there's two I would like to read. This is a book that just came out called Organic Dreams and Pickled Nightmares, a pocket full of political poetry for the resistance. I had to write that after the last election because many of us are still living that nightmare. It says, "Don't send help. We are overflowing our banks, creating a flood at every bend. Don't send help if you intend only to build the banks higher when the forecast calls for rain. Please don't send more sandbags. There's a reason they never last. Don't send help unless it's to stop the rain. While every raindrop matters, a drought is long overdue. For all who cannot live underwater, we need to move upstream and see that it is always easier than watching our sandbags wash away. Don't send help unless you send the message that overpopulation is solvable by means we already have available. Don't send help unless you roll up your sleeves with condoms in one hand and food in the other, because there is no planet B." And the last one I want to leave you with is called Think Like a Planet. Revolve around the brightest stars. Nurture biodiversity. Become a beacon in the night. Reflect the light of others. Inspire from a distance. And be strong enough to hold moons up in the sky. Thank you so much. That always makes me cry. So I'm trying to hold the moons up in the sky. I have to admit there are days when I think I should just stay home and play in my garden and not bother. Thank you for making me think it was worth it. Thank you so much.